Anzi, I love
Hello and welcome to Crosstalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. From the fog of war to the drums of war, Washington and its Western and regional allies are again agitating for a senseless conflict in the Middle East, this time against Syria. Again, it's all about weapons of mass destruction, an echo of the catastrophe called Iraq. Will Western military intervention in Syria only make things worse? To crosstalk the war in Syria, I'm joined by Yazan Abdallah in Damascus. He is a Syrian academic with the Syrian Foreign Press. In Washington, we have Michael Shank. He is the director of foreign policy at the Friends Committee on National Legislation and a professor at George Mason University. And in New York, we cross to Ed Krajewski. He is an associate editor at Reason 24/7. All right, gentlemen, crosstalk rules in effect. That means you can jump in anytime you want. Michael, in Washington, if I can go to you first, Secretary Kerry is absolutely convinced that the Assad regime has used chemical weapons against his people. He doesn't give any proof, but he's absolutely convinced, and now we have the drumbeat to war. I think I saw this movie, and it has a very bad ending. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, certainly we did the same in Iraq. We undermined UN inspectors there. We're doing the same in Syria. We actually called on the inspectors in Syria to abort their mission, certainly paving the way for an easier strike on our end so we don't kill any UN inspectors. But it's a little spurious to say that we have the evidence when the inspectors actually don't have the evidence. So yeah, we're seeing echoes like you mentioned in the intro. This is a replay on Iraq.
Ed, how do you account for all of this? Because it sounds like a complete sham.
Well, it sounds like they're going to Damascus, even though maybe they don't want to. So it's interesting to see. It's kind of like who's leading this, you know, because you look at American intervention in Syria, and there's no really American strategic interest there. So, you know, is this going to be a repeat of Libya, where it's kind of the Europeans leading us along, and Congress isn't going to do anything about it? We know that already, and so that kind of leaves this president's foreign policies aimless anyway. And this kind of it's another thing that's like we're not engaging, but we're intervening. You know, so it's not going to turn out good if cooler heads don't prevail.
Yes, and in Damascus, you're in Damascus. How do you see all of this? What's the timing all about?
Well, America is not going to be embarrassed repeating the actions of Iraq 10 years ago. America did it times and times before, and they are going to repeat it again. Now they're looking for a pretext. They've put forward that they're absolutely convinced that chemical weapons have been used by the Syrian government. They're not even interested in the results of the inquiry by the UN Commission. In fact, Mr. Kerry said that they're not interested in the results because they have made their own judgments. So they've made up their mind, it seems, that what they want is to employ force towards Syria, because clearly this move is because of the advancement the Syrian army has been making on the ground, and the American administration seems to be rather hysterical about the fact that the calculations have proven to be completely wrong from day one in the Syrian crisis.
Well, Michael, you know, they've been wrong from day one. They just keep getting it wrong, right? I mean, this is insanity.
Well, they've been wrong from the very beginning vis-a-vis Syria. I mean, we withdrew our ambassadors early on, kind of saying to Syria that we don't want to engage with you, we're going to demonize you, we're going to vilify you, we're going to isolate you, which makes it much easier for Assad or any leader to essentially go crazy on his own people. Let's be clear. I mean, the deaths that happened last week, Doctors Without Borders saying is 355. That's deplorable. Any death is deplorable, whether it's U.S. airstrikes in Iraq or in Afghanistan that kill hundreds of people, or chemical weapons in Syria used by someone, maybe the government, killing hundreds of people. Death is deplorable. But on Syria, we have not exhausted all means available. Certainly on the diplomatic front, we only engaged Russia primarily. That's like only engaging Israel on
just
Iran.
A little bit, okay? Because you're a good point. You know, Ed, they still had the peace process, quote unquote, but the Americans they dropped the ball every single time.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's, maybe I'm reading into it, but maybe there's a little bit of a reluctance somewhere in the White House into getting into another quagmire, because, you know, Syria may not be Iraq, but it's not Libya either. Obviously, the presence of the Russians makes it a big difference.
Yeah.
So there's some strategic balance there that I don't think it's just not worth interrupting. You know, just like I don't really understand if these we'll see what the report says. There's supposed to be a U.S. report that's going to explain who used these chemical weapons. But, you know, if it was the Syrian government, just kind of, it almost doesn't make sense because who does it benefit? You know, at this point, like you said, they've got the advantage on the ground. So does it really make sense for them to now do something? President Obama's, he's moved the red line back before, you know, because at first he said when they use chemical weapons, and then they use chemical weapons, or he said they use chemical weapons.
Well, somebody might have used chemical weapons. Someone might have used chemical weapons. That's all we really know.
I mean, but the idea that Bashar Assad would order that now is, I mean, he could be completely deluded at this point, sure, but it just seems like a spectacular own goal if this came from the actual higher reaches of the Syrian government. And it ends in a Western intervention.
Yes, in Damascus, give me some logic here. What, in your mind, what is the timing all about in Damascus? What is the timing?
There are a few things to consider when you look at the timing. First, the advancements on the ground by the Syrian army, especially in the suburbs of Damascus. The areas that the Syrian army has captured recently are of strategic importance, and they will reflect a momentum that the Syrian army has started to establish from early this year and is going to mount more. So when they were talking about balance of power on the ground, they've clearly it's transpiring that this is not achievable for them, and the longer they wait for a political solution, the longer the Syrian army is going to the more the Syrian army is going to have control on the ground. That's number one. Number two, there seems to be an ongoing conflict within the American administration with two currents. One that is known to be very pro-intervention, the Hawks, the New Conservatives, who are clearly applying extreme pressure on the Obama administration. Obama, coming from a Democrat background, has probably been a little bit more reluctant for intervention. He's clearly announced a policy that will try to avoid engaging in more wars. His priority is to withdraw from Afghanistan. So with more pressure, he's probably going to succumb to a compromise with those hawks inside the American administration and the advisors to take a scenario similar to Kosovo. That's the more scenario that I would imagine, that he would probably consider remote airstrikes without boots on the ground intervention or substantial military intervention that would engage America.
Let me ask you a question. Let me ask you a question. Is regime change in the cards or stalemate, continued stalemate? Back to Damascus. What's the outcome?
Well, I mean, when you're facing a major power like the United States with a coalition of countries such as the United Kingdom and France and many other regional players, then of course airstrikes by a coalition from these countries would probably affect the balance on the ground and would probably eventually lead to perhaps a change in the stalemate, if that's what they're trying to achieve. However, that comes at the cost of destroying the Syrian state and the Syrian army. You cannot expect what perhaps a fool may do. I mean, they're very powerful, and they've done it before. They may do it again, but that comes at the expense of worsening the humanitarian situation in Syria and not improving it. So we have to be very clear here that when they claim that they're coming here for humanitarian reasons, it's the absolute opposite. They're coming here to actually create another humanitarian quagmire that will probably take decades to resolve, not only in Syria, but in the whole entire region. Exactly right. It was very funny. It was pathetic even to listen to Mr. Obama's interview with the CNN last week. When he talked about Syria for 3 or 4 minutes, he mentioned the international law and the international community more than 3 or 4 times. And he was always going back to the fact that he is going to seek an international mandate.
Yeah, but it's very interesting when the President of the United States says international law, it's synonymous with NATO. That's what it means to him, and that's what it means to this administration. Ed, you wanted to jump in. Go ahead.
Right.
Go ahead, Ed.
Yeah, if I could jump in, I mean, this is where I would say the blame lies with Congress. who over the last several decades has abdicated its war-making powers, because at the end of the day, it's Congress that would have to approve this, and only because of what Congress has done before is it that we're even in a situation now where President Obama can say, well, you know, I can go look at the international community and go look at NATO or say UN, not the UN in this situation, or the Arab League or whoever, and say I can get my authorization from them. That should have never happened. You know, it's the U.S. military that's supposed to be deployed for U.S. interests, and it's supposed to be approved by Congress. Congress has the constitutional authority to declare war, not the president, not the White House. And if Congress hadn't abdicated its constitutional authority there, we wouldn't be so close to the precipice. And that's a huge problem. You know, just the other day, Speaker Boehner's spokesperson said, you know, the Speaker made it clear that he wants Congress to be in consultation on any
he doesn't
possible
need
military
Congress
action.
because Western media, Western media is going for war.
So that people know who to blame when there's a war.
Michael, look at Western media. They're going for war. I mean, watch CNN.
Certainly. I mean, yep, CNN saying 1,300 died last week when Doctors Without Borders said only 355, which is still a serious amount of people dead. But CNN
and we still don't know how those people died. We still don't know how those people died.
Right. Peter, I want to address two things that have come up with both Dr. Abdullah and Ed. Congress and international law. In Congress, thankfully, there's a bipartisan effort in the Senate, bipartisan effort in the House. Senators Udall, Murphy, Lee, and Rand Paul in the Senate. In the House, Reps Welch and Gibson. Both bills banning military aid, U.S. military aid into Syria because they're worried that it would just escalate the violence and the deaths, which it would. But on international law, if the president really cares about international law, we would pursue something within the International Criminal Court. Certainly this has come up at the UN several times. The Human Rights Council pushing this forward, the High Commissioner of the Human Rights Council suggesting this be a referral to the ICC. That would allow us to arrest Assad or at least create an international narrative, a moral narrative.
All right, gentlemen, I have to jump in here. This is a very interesting discussion. We'll continue with international law after we turn from our break. Stay with RT.
Great, thank you.
Anzi, I love
Business news, reviews, economic ups and downs from the finance hub of Moscow to London, New York, Shanghai and the rest of the globe. Join me, Katie Pilbeam, every week on RT.
It was a terrible mistake, and we're working very hard to make up for it.
Once again, we put something on the air. It's a flat-out lie.
Have you ever had sex with Governor Rick Perry?
No, wait. Do not answer that. I want you to watch what we're about to do because you've never seen anything like this on television.
The interview for tomorrow is confirmed. 10 a.m.
As the world prays, it is hoped that they will find a global solution to a global problem.
The frequencies call for a total revamp of the system.
More news today. Violence has once again flared up.
These are the images the world has been seeing from the streets of Canada.
Giant corporations rule the day.
I love it.
Welcome back to Crosstalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. To remind you, we're discussing a possible Western strike against Syria. Okay, Michael, I'd like to go back to you in Washington. You mentioned before the break international law. Where was the international law with Iraq? Again, that's how I started this program. This is a bad movie, and it's being repeated again. We haven't learned anything? The U.S. hasn't learned anything?
Right. We like to enforce international law when it's convenient. Certainly when we're dealing with Iran, we care about the NPT and that Iran is flouting the NPT. But when it comes to UN inspectors in Iraq or Syria, we're keen to flout that. We're also not keen to support the ICC. I mean, we've sent folks, Bashir in Sudan and Kenyatta in Kenya, we've sent folks to the ICC for less than what Assad has committed in Syria. Certainly that would be an appropriate path to follow, but also international diplomacy. My point about only engaging Russia, why aren't we engaging Iran and Hezbollah and other stakeholders that could have leverage over Syria? I mean, even Israel President Shimon Peres saying we should engage the Arab League. We haven't engaged the Arab League extensively on Syria. We did a little bit on Libya, and then Arab League, once they kind of gave the green light, retracted that green light. But we haven't engaged the Organization for Islamic Conference either. If we are serious about de-escalating violence in Syria, we would do all of that. We're not.
Okay, Ed, you know, who do they want to win? The Obama administration, who do they want to win in Syria? Jihadists? I mean, that's the other side of the coin here. I mean, I don't get that. Are they going to kill them too? Declare war against them as well, illegally?
They're trying to play the game where they're not taking sides. They're just responding to the chemical weapons use.
Well, what about the 100,000 people that were killed?
You know, the Israelis.
What about the 100,000 people that were killed?
It's just this 1,300 or this 300. You know, that's the political games they play. You know, it's weapons of mass destruction. The Tsarnaev brothers, they're alleged to have used weapons of mass destruction, you know, and those were pressure cookers. So it can really mean whatever you want it to mean. And if for some reason now's the time that they want to do it, they'll do it. But hopefully it's not what they want to do. So, you know, we'll see. We'll see what happens.
Let me ask you, yes, on the same thing in Damascus. I mean, the other side, is this the side that the United States and its Western allies want to empower?
I don't think their problem is really Syria per se, as much as they're really becoming hysterical for what's appearing to be a new world order starting to happen or starting to shape in the Middle East. They cannot bear the idea that their alliance that they decided to take in the early 2000s towards 2010 with the extreme Islamist governments and installed there some puppet governments around the Middle East, that alliance is not really working well, and it's at now serious risk of collapsing. There's the alliance of Syria with Iran, with the resistance group or league, let's say, in the Middle East, that is really prevailing, and they realize that if Syria doesn't fall as they planned it, it will backlash on them, and already the American leverage in the area will start to shake. We've seen that happening in several countries in the Middle East where they've lost they lost their leverage. Clearly, they at the start employed Qatar in the Syrian conflict. The Qataris didn't perform well. The Americans were in a bit of confusion. Then the Saudis put a bid to lead. Then they said, yeah, fine, why not? As long as you can get us out of the Syrian crisis. Now they're not convinced that even the Saudis, with their full measures that they're deploying to Syria, including the jihadists, the money, the media warfare on Syria, that the Saudis will probably be able to achieve their goals. So now they have to resort to military force to save their position in the Middle East. They know that if Syria succeeds in surviving this war against it from all fronts, Syria will only be a nucleus to a snowball that will start probably growing towards other areas in the world. Well, it will start redrawing the map of a new world order. The Americans now are probably very concerned about such a scenario, and they want to stop it by force, by hysteria, by any means that are available to them now.
Michael, would you like to expand upon that? Because it's a very interesting point. The Americans are just losing their grip on the region, and they have to show who's boss.
Excellent analysis by Dr. Abdullah. I mean, we think we can cleanly go in, remove the bad guy, and somehow the country is going to be better off. But we see Iraq's current violence as illustrative of how impossible that is and how deleterious our approach is. We certainly see that in Afghanistan. We're seeing that in Libya. We thought we could support a very cleanly defined, with clean parameters, rebel group in Libya, and that we funnel arms and money to them and them only, that they'll somehow be able to stand up and overthrow Gaddafi. We're doing the same in Syria, thinking we can support their council, their national council, in standing up. And if we just legitimate them and officially recognize them, then we can proceed, and it will be clean. We'll bomb, we'll go out, everything will be fine. The Syrian people will be liberated. But when you have so many case studies, I mean, Yeltsin was kind to the president early on in this conversation, because I think the president is actually as war-hungry as the predecessor, President Bush. Yeah. I mean, thankfully, we have some more rational voices in the Senate. Senator Kaine, Senator Jack Reed tweeting last night saying that they don't believe a military option is a good option. We shouldn't pursue it. It would exacerbate relations between the West and the Muslim world. So there are some saner voices in the Senate, but I think the White House is very much on the war path. We've seen it in several countries, and that list is growing.
Ed, what do you think about that? I mean, what does Obama want to gain? To show that he's a great war president here? Because, you know, Egypt is a terrible mess right now. His foreign policy is in tatters right now. He can't get much done at home. I mean, this is a bizarre way to leave your mark.
I mean, the thing is, it's what foreign policy, you know? I mean, there's a debate to be had about the differences between George Bush's wars and Barack Obama's wars. But, you know, right or wrong, George Bush, there was a certain kind of understanding of this kind of purpose, you know, and it may have been weird and off and wrong and destructive, but there was this idea of, like, this is the purpose of American foreign policy. We're going to make Iraq believe what we want them to believe. We're going to make Afghanistan believe what we want them to believe. Here, it's just kind of you're just kind of stumbling from one place to another, you know, Libya, Egypt, Syria, with no kind of purpose, no idea of what the strategic interest is. And it's kind of saying the same thing here, because what does it benefit? What's it going to benefit America to send a bunch of cruise missiles to Syria because of this chemical weapons use? You know, if you talk about a wag the dog situation, unfortunately, we're in a period of American history where we don't need a wag the dog. You know, you have Miley Cyrus twerking at the VMAs. No one's talking about Syria on Monday. So the idea, or whatever other scandals there are, that this one might try to cover. So it's hard to understand what the thinking in the White House is. You know, you understand the neoconservative cabal there, your Samantha Powers, your whoever, Hillary Clinton, I guess, is not there anymore, John Kerry to a lesser extent. So you kind of understand that they kind of want to be the big good guy who comes in and drops bombs till the people stop killing other people. But I don't see what it is. You know, in Iraq, you understood it was wrong, but you understood what George Bush's plan in Iraq, why he wanted to go. You know, you might have disagreed with it, it was wrong, but at least there was something there where you can say, I kind of understand where he's coming from. In this case, it's just really hard to tell what they're doing other than grasping at straws. Yes, it's really just, and I'm not saying this just to slam the president, I'm saying it just really does not seem like they have articulated any kind of foreign policy whatsoever, and are just stumbling blindly into this.
Let's go to Damascus here. Can you give me the sentiment of what the people of the city of Damascus think about recent statements coming out of Western capitals? I mean, are they expecting cruise missiles?
I would like you to be here, Peter, and go around the city and speak to people. People seriously have strong morale, and I'm not here exaggerating. I really have strong morale. They know that America will at some point attack them. They know that they've been at war with Israel for 60 years, and they know that all these Arab puppet countries in the region are instruments and small tools to Israel. They know that American foreign policy policy is manipulated by Israel. So they're not any surprise that they may receive airstrikes. They have seen it before. People here, the fathers or the sons, have lived wars with Israel and have lived the aggression and the embargo from America and from other Western states. So the morale is really high. What they believe in is only their resilience and only their own resources, and the fact that they've survived wars before, and they are committed to the Syrian army. They know that they are all together with the means that are available at the disposal of the Syrian government right now, without any foreign aid, without begging for any unexpected help or conditional help from any other state. They know that with the resources they have at their disposal, they will be able to survive, and they will be able to actually change the map of any such war. It may transcend. It may well transcend outside the Syrian borders, but it certainly will not result in the defeat of the Syrians. They were never defeated, and that's what they
That's an
deeply
interesting
believe
point.
in.
If I could go to Michael in Washington, in Obama's world, do you have to destroy Syria to save Syria? Do you know what I'm getting at? I mean, they're just going to, because they have to destroy the entire state to win.
Right. This goes back to Dr. Abdullah's point, where the neocons in the West and even the Liberal Party, even among the Democratic Party, think that we can bomb our way to freedom or bomb our way to democracy. That's what we've done throughout the Middle East. We've left a legacy of that in the last 100 years, certainly more poignantly in the last 30 to 40 to 50 years. Listen, Martin Dempsey, Joint Chiefs of Staff Chairman, saying that we shouldn't pursue military options. I think we should keep his words in mind. We should also recognize that we've used chemical weapons before, too. Certainly in Iraq, napalm and phosphorus, using chemical weapons, then supporting Saddam's use of chemical weapons in Iran. That news came out recently. I mean, the way to go in Syria, I was in Damascus years ago, and the Japanese were looked favorably upon because they were investing in a lot of infrastructure in Syria, economic development, and the Syrian government, Syrian people appreciated that intervention. If we're going to intervene, let's think about really helping people beyond humanitarian aid, which we have to pursue, but helping people in a really substantive way. You know, in Iraq, the infrastructure is essentially the same as it was pre-invasion. We have not left that country power, water, sanitation, etc., better off post-invasion.
All right, gentlemen.
The same thing's going to happen in
let's
Syria.
keep an eye on this story because events are moving very
off.
fast. Many thanks, Eddie, my guests in Damascus, Washington, and in New York. And thanks to our viewers for watching us here at RT. See you next time. And remember, crosstalk rules.
Anzi,
I love it.